I was hatched in a counting chamber beneath a confiscated sky. My people, the Ithari, remember in layers. We do not carry our dead behind us the way humans do, like a line of absent bodies. We carry them inside as pattern. Every grief leaves a lattice in the memory fold. Enough lattices and a life becomes rigid, useful, predictable, easy to rule. The elder powers understood that about us. They understood many things. When the Varkal came to our waters 6 generations before my shell broke, they did not negotiate. Their ships nested in the upper atmosphere like black seeds and shadowed our tides. Then came the decree of productive limitation. Our deep ocean foundries were seized. Our orbital rings were dismantled. 3 breeding shoals were sterilized from space to reduce future volatility. Every Ithari hive clutch thereafter was counted, approved, taxed, and when necessary, culled. We were permitted enough industry to service Varkal military routes through the outer middle band and no more. The Varkal were not cruel in the emotional sense. That would have made them simpler. They were vast radial organisms, grown from dense core worlds where competition had been older than our oceans. Their bodies rode armored support frames, each frame carrying a pulsing crown of sensory tendrils and 6 tool limbs. They spoke with pressure clicks and polarized light. To them, younger species were transient biological events, useful if directed, dangerous if left unshaped. They did not hate us, they pruned us. Around them, the old galactic order had thickened over ages into habit. The central species, old and terrible in different ways, divided corridors, tribute basins, labor reserves, and technological ceilings. Young civilizations were assigned limits, some were harvested, some were penned. Some were broken in public to instruct the rest. I served in the archive of compliance on Keth Vale, an artificial shelf city suspended over a Varkal fuel sea. My role was to translate between Varkal strategic glyphs, tributary records, and the lesser species that passed through. I cataloged petitions that would be denied, sanctions that would be enforced, shipping assignments that always extracted more than they returned. I learned the syntax of defeat so well that I could hear it before it was spoken. That was when the humans arrived. Not to Keth Vale at first. Far outer edge species rarely came inward so soon after first contact. But reports came through the archive. Bipedal oxygen breathers from a sparse rim arm, tool dexterous, thermal volatile, individually differentiated to a degree many found excessive. Their systems had been mapped and delimited within a standard span, expansion rights capped, military tonnage restricted, relay construction monitored. It was ordinary, efficient, final. The notes attached by senior Varkal assessors were almost bored, peripheral origin, low strategic density. Promising adaptive cognition, but socially fragmented. Developmental chronology, respectable not exceptional, containable. I believed the file because every file like it had always been true. When I first saw a human, I thought, soft. She came with a commercial delegation to Keth Vale to negotiate fuel catalyst access and passage rates. She had a narrow frame, 2 eyes fixed forward, and skin that looked disastrously unarmored. She wore atmosphere mesh and a dark pressure mantle marked with a small silver emblem I did not know. She smiled often, which I mistook for appeasement. The Varkal trade adjudicator kept her standing in a chamber, calibrated too cold for her kind, and made no adjustment. He forced pauses so long that even I, who had translated for centuries of humiliation, felt my inner membranes tighten. He referred to human space by its assigned district number rather than its chosen names. When she requested review of a route seizure affecting 3 human prospecting stations beyond their newly recognized limit, he simply displayed the delimitation edict and pulsed amusement through his crown. Your expansion exceeded your grant, I translated. It exceeded your notice, she said calmly. Not the space we had already occupied. The adjudicator flexed his support frame. Occupation is defined by recognized power. She looked at him for a long moment, then inclined her head. Then we recognize your position. I filed that away as surrender. Years passed. I watched humans as one watches a dim star, not important, yet oddly difficult to ignore. They complied too easily. That was what first unsettled me. When younger species met the limits, they strained against them in obvious ways. They smuggled tools. They falsified mineral surveys. They lashed out at patrol craft and earned massacres. Or they collapsed inward and became useful. Humans did neither. They accepted inspections. They revised maps. They paid transit tribute. Their diplomats learned elder protocols with insulting speed. Their traders appeared across the subordinate worlds, buying low-value ores, algae polymers, radiation-hardened ceramics, decommissioned field coils, archival cast-offs, agricultural biota. Boring things. Foundation things. They asked questions no one else asked. Not what weapons the Varkal preferred, but how often their fleet tenders refueled in deep transit. Not how many patrol ships guarded a lane, but which dry docks could fabricate replacement spinal members during wartime load. Not just treaty clauses, but how enforcement signals propagated when primary relays failed. They bought old navigation records from species too poor to value them. They hired dismissed technicians from civilizations already gutted by containment. They sent survey teams into regions considered strategically marginal, where stars were thin and distances ugly, and no central power cared to look closely. At Keth Vale, I processed dozens of human cargo declarations. They were painfully lawful, too lawful. A species still new to interstellar oversight should have made more mistakes. Yet every shipment fit the letter of assigned quotas, while somehow thickening human presence in useless places. I began keeping a private thread map of their movements, a forbidden habit for an archive functionary. At first it looked like noise. Then, over 13 local cycles, I saw a pattern. They were building redundancy. Not in the recognized human district where all inspection was focused, beyond it, around it, behind it. Out in dead systems, brown dwarf clusters, cometary reservoirs, abandoned mining cavities from extinct cultures. They established weather stations where no weather mattered, research buoys where no one researched, emergency depots for traffic routes almost never used. Each item alone was trivial. Together they formed structure. I did not know what structure, only that it existed. I made the mistake of mentioning some of this to senior curator Vel, whose memory fans had stiffened with age. He gave a ripple of contempt. Peripheral species always overweave. Distance makes them anxious. Humans do not seem anxious, I said. Then they have not understood their position yet. I wanted that to be true. At the time, I still believed understanding always ended the same way. Then came the first thing I could not file as commerce. A plague bloom struck the Senru enclaves in the Pethan Drift, a gas habitat people already under Varkal labor tithe. The Senru were filament colonies, cloud mines held in magnetic skin. Their brood chambers failed under a catalyst contamination, traced to Varkal refinery runoff. Millions of juvenile thought-knots were dying. The Senru petitioned for corridor priority to move medical supplies. The Varkal refused. War tonnage had precedence. A human convoy rerouted anyway, not military vessels. Civil haulers, long and ugly, running hard from the outer lanes with medical freezers and atmospheric scrub arrays. They requested emergency passage under common rescue principles. The request sat in queue while the Senru brood fields dimmed. I was in the chamber when the Varkal response finally came, denied. I translated it to the human captain over light delay relay. Transit remains restricted. Unauthorized penetration will be impounded. The captain, a square-faced male with fatigue etched into his skin, was silent for 4 breaths. Then he said, "How many are left alive?" I checked the Senru feed. 41% of developing clusters. Falling, a Varkal monitor clicked irritation. The loss is within acceptable subordinate fluctuation. I translated that too. I had to. The human's eyes changed. I did not yet know enough of them to name it, but I remember feeling colder despite my water mantle. "We are proceeding," he said. The convoy crossed anyway. Varkal patrol craft intercepted. 2 human ships were gutted. The rest were seized and towed to impound. The Senru Bloom collapsed 3 days later. The Varkal posted the wreckage in every tributary feed as a lesson in jurisdiction. The human dead were listed as culprits in unauthorized logistic interference. I expected noise from humanity, anger, threats, pleas. There was almost none. Formal protest, precisely worded, compensation claims. Demands for release of surviving crews. Then quiet, too quiet. The second outrage was larger. An inner-lane garden world called Elio 9 had hosted a mixed settlement under layered guarantees. Native Talaran reef cities, a human agro-colony, and leased Ithari desalination towers staffed by my kin. The Talaran had fallen behind on tribute after a fungal blight. A Varkal tribunal reassigned the system's upper orbit and export rights to a Keld warclade, another elder species that lived in communal bone citadels and considered pain a valid language of administration. The Talaran protested. The humans offered debt relief and emergency yield systems. For that, the tribunal ruled the human colony in violation of containment law and ordered withdrawal within 9 days. There was no mechanism of appeal. I was sent with the records team to witness compliance. I remember Elio 9 by smell, sweet vegetation, salt towers, and the metallic tang of fear. The humans were dismantling irrigation grids and loading children into shuttle caravans. The Talaran, broad radial swimmers in portable fluid cradles, pressed themselves against tank glass in distress colors. My own Ithari crews worked in silence beneath armed oversight. Then the Keld descended before the deadline expired. They said the colony's continued orbital mass constituted strategic obstruction. Their drop rams broke the northern arcology dome. Fire took the oxygen quarter, the evacuation lanes jammed. Human rescue boats launched anyway, crossing debris fields while Keld monitors broadcast legality notices. A Talaran brood nursery was crushed in the second collapse. One of our desal towers ruptured and boiled 300 Ithari workers in superheated brine. I thought then that the humans would finally lash out and be slaughtered for it. Instead, they kept pulling bodies from the wreckage. A human woman with blood down one arm carried a Talaran juvenile through falling glass, while Keld enforcement drones hovered overhead, recording violations for future penalty. Another human team cut open one of our burst pressure shafts and dragged surviving Ithari into portable tanks, though there was no advantage in saving us. No treaty required it. No compensation would come. Later, in the ash-stink dark, I heard one of them speaking into a field recorder. "They wanted panic," he said. "Document everything. Names, timestamps, hallmarks, command chain. No rumors, facts, facts." While the dead still steamed. That was when my skepticism became curiosity sharpened by unease. Humans were angry. That much was obvious even to an Ithari. But their anger did not spill, it condensed. Over the next decade, the pattern deepened. Humans appeared in subordinate academies teaching materials science, epidemiology, encrypted networking, orbital agriculture. Always lawful, always beneath military thresholds, always in sectors the elder powers deemed marginal. Where humans worked, young species became harder to starve. Their reactors failed less often. Their freight routes became less dependent on elder relays. Their historical archives, if hidden, were copied and distributed. The Varkal noticed enough to issue warnings against unsanctioned interspecies coordination. Then they impounded a human-built relay lattice, used for famine alerts among 3 tributary peoples. Then they executed the crew of a human-chartered hospital ship for crossing a quarantine cordon that existed mainly to isolate a rebellious labor moon. Each time, humanity protested with chilling politeness. Each time, more humans vanished from visible positions near the center. At first, I thought they were retreating under pressure. Then I realized replacements were not arriving because the positions themselves were no longer being filled. Human trade offices reduced staff. Human merchants concluded contracts but declined long extensions. Human technical advisors completed projects and did not renew them. It was as if a tide had begun to withdraw, but so gradually that only an archivist with a private thread map would feel the shore changing. And yet in the same years, their moral voice grew louder. That surprised the entire archive. Most subordinate species learned to speak around reality. Humans began naming it. At the conclave of 12 corridors, their delegates stood before elder representatives and recited catalogued atrocities from 300 years before human contact and 23 years after it. Sterilized clutches, orbit burnings, tribute famines, technology ceilings enforced by massacre, labor populations vented to vacuum after quota failure. I had helped compile some of those records, not knowing who had requested them. The human did not plead, he accused. He called the galactic order a machinery of predation maintained by strategic terror. He demanded binding sovereignty rights for all sapients, independent transit protections, anti-extermination law, and collective intervention against punitive massacres. The chamber reacted, as if poison had been introduced into the air. The Keld flared their pain fans in delight. The Varkal radiated a dangerous stillness. Some lesser species went motionless with fear. I did too. Because I knew what followed defiance. Public challenge only fed the lesson. Afterward, in a service corridor, I encountered the same human diplomat I had first seen on Keth Vale decades earlier. Her hair had silvered. Her face had more lines. But her eyes were unchanged. "You have made a fatal sound," I told her before I could stop myself. She looked at me with what humans call surprise. "My species has served the compliance archives for generations," I said. "I know the pattern." "They will make an example of you." "Yes," she said. That answer disturbed me more than denial would have. "You understand and continue." "We understand," she said. "We continue." Why now? For a moment I thought she would refuse me. Instead she said, "Because there are enough of us left alive to choose when we stop swallowing it." I carried those words inside for many cycles. Enough of us. Choose when. It implied reserves I could not measure. Then the breaking point came, and even I misread it. The world was called Harrogate in human speech, though the Varkal registry named it Peripheral Agrarian Habitat 441C. It lay far from the human rim stronghold, tucked into an intergalactic trade braid under formal neutrality guarantees. Mostly civilians, food exports, refugee intake from smaller species displaced by corridor violence, human medics, Ithari Desal teams, Senru atmosphere engineers. A place built almost offensively around the idea that different peoples might live without tribute chains. The elders chose it precisely for that reason. The charge was administrative sedition, unauthorized aid to restricted populations, illegal archival dispersal, and latent militarization unsupported by evidence. The sentence was exemplary nullification. A Varkal-Keld punitive fleet entered orbit under conclave seal. They jammed evacuation channels, rejected surrender traffic, and deployed sterilization lances into the weather systems. Then came the orbital fire. From Keth Vale we watched through relay lag as cloud bands ignited. Oceans flashed to poison steam. The continental shelters failed one by one. Civilian lift arrays trying to break orbit were bracketed and erased. Formal notices repeated on all channels that this was not extermination but lawful strategic correction. I knew Ithari were dying there. I knew Senru clouds were burning into static. I knew more humans were dying in an hour than had died in all previous sanctions combined. The archive around me went silent except for machine hum. I thought, this is the lesson. This is where they break. Not because humans were weak. Because no species survives that sort of statement and remains itself. The old order had been built on making such statements unforgettable. Humanity's response was not what I expected. At first, there was only a single transmission from their recognized delegation. No plea, no threat, no rhetoric. Just a list of the dead as numbers climbed beyond counting, and a declaration that all further diplomatic engagement was suspended pending determination of responsibility. Then nothing, and I mean nothing. Their embassy on Keth Vale sealed within 6 hours and was empty by the next cycle. Merchant berths stood open. Warehouses were cleared with impossible speed. Outer lane couriers reported human ships altering course without explanation. Human-maintained clinics transferred data and shut down. Exchange students departed on emergency charters. Advisory teams left tools behind but took archives, hard drives, seed banks, prototype cores. Messages went unanswered. At the archive, we called into human silence. The elders celebrated too soon. Varkal analysts declared the species psychologically collapsed. Keld warclades lobbied for annexation of the restricted human district before rival powers could seize it. Conclave broadcasts praised the restoration of order and warned lesser species not to imitate human moral theater. Among the tributary peoples, rumor spread like electrical disease. Some whispered that humanity had fled into the dark. Some said they were tearing themselves apart in grief. Others said they were gathering every ship they had for a suicidal rush at the core. I did not know what to believe. But my private thread map, dormant for years, began to blaze with absence. Human signatures vanished not chaotically but in coordinated layers, first the visible, then the useful, then the obscure. Traffic patterns collapsed into silence, so complete it became shape. I began to feel dread in a new way, not the old resigned stiffness of prey beneath a known claw, but the sensation of standing over deep water when something immense turns below. The Elder Punitive Expedition launched toward the outer edge on the 83rd day after Harrogate. Its purpose was obvious: crush the human home districts before they could rebuild legitimacy through martyrdom. The fleet was enormous by any standard I had known. Varkal spear carriers, Keld ram citadels, contracted auxiliary screens from half a dozen subject species. Keth Vale fed them fuel. I translated the dispatches. I watched them depart in confidence. The first reports back were confused. Long-range reconnaissance failed in sectors that should have been clear. Human relay emissions appeared in impossible densities, then vanished. Supply tenders disappeared between stars without distress calls. Scout flotillas entered systems. The charts marked thinly settled and found layered defense webs deeper than any recognized district inventory allowed. Mines that were not mines, sensor ghosts that killed. Then the main fleet made contact, and the galaxy learned what human restraint had been hiding. I did not see the battle directly. No one truly did, not in whole. What came through were fragments from shattered feeds, emergency telemetry, auxiliary testimony. Human drives crossed distances the elder doctrines had treated as operationally irrelevant. Fleets emerged not from expected vectors, but from dark approaches thought too barren to support mass movement. Their coordination lag was so low that Varkal tactical analysts first assumed local signal loops or machine precision nets. It was neither, or not merely. It was a command architecture beyond current doctrine, distributed, redundant, and terrifyingly fast. Their ships were not elegant by elder standards, they were purposeful. Heat-scarred, modular, armored around function, built in numbers no one had guessed they possessed. Hidden dock networks from the outer dark had been working for decades. Civilian hull forms unfolded into missile carriers. Habitat fabrication systems became war foundries. Survey craft became kill scouts. Entire reserve fleets appeared from cometary cloud depots and hollow moons that the old powers had never thought worth counting. The Elder expedition entered human space expecting to amputate a frontier nuisance. It struck a prepared depth state spread across an outer volume larger than all recognized maps. And the humans were furious, not wild, not sloppy. Furious in the way a cutting beam is furious. They dismantled the punitive fleet's logistics first. Tankers, tender swarm, repair crucibles, relay escorts. Then they blinded command vessels with attacks that seemed to come from empty vacuum. Varkal formations, built on assumptions of range and refit timing, began to starve in the middle of battle. Keld ram citadels charged into kill zones sculpted hours in advance by predictive fires. Auxiliary subject craft surrendered, defected, or simply ceased obeying. Within 11 days, what had been announced as an exemplary campaign became a rolling catastrophe. On Keth Vale, I stood in the archive chamber as casualty updates turned from clipped confidence to impossible loss. Senior Curator Vell shed 2 memory fans in stress and still insisted the situation remained containable. Then the first human ultimatum arrived. It was addressed not to the elders alone, but to all tributary species. It listed the responsible command chains for Harrogate. It offered safe defection corridors to every coerced auxiliary force. It guaranteed recognition of territorial sovereignty to subordinate species that ceased tribute support to elder war efforts. It promised trials for extermination crimes. It warned that any further punitive action against civilian populations would trigger immediate strategic retaliation. There was one line I remember perfectly. We did not withdraw in fear. We withdrew to stop pretending you were reformable. The spell broke there, not everywhere at once. Fear never leaves in a single breath, but something ancient cracked. The Senru sabotaged atmosphere processors, feeding a Varkal naval basin. Talaran reef cities blocked Keld troop descents and flooded docking caverns. Ithari maintenance crews on 3 occupied stations, including Keth Vale, corrupted fuel mix algorithms and vented launch reserves into the upper sea. Species that had endured for centuries suddenly discovered that the elder fleets were not gods. They were machines, large, cruel old machines. Machines could be made to fail. I chose then. Archivists are not built for heroics. Our instincts are to preserve pattern, not rupture it. But generations of compliance had made me an accessory to every murder I translated. When the hidden Ithari cell on Keth Vale contacted me through a maintenance hymn encoded in old brood mathematics, I answered. My role was small and absolute. I opened records. I gave the rebellion the convoy maps, sterilization orders, cull authorizations, tribute algorithms, labor transfer manifests, chain of command archives, and private Varkal assessments of subordinate biological tolerances. I transmitted everything humans had been gathering through 100 quiet questions, and everything we had been too afraid to use. Not because they lacked it already. I understood by then that humans probably knew more than we did. I did it because truth had to leave the cages where I had kept it. The Varkal on Kethvale discovered the leak when station drones stopped obeying launch priority and began routing civilian evacuation instead. Fighting broke through the lower shell levels. Ithari workers, whom the elders had always classed as docile under pressure, rose from service conduits with cutting torches and pressure charges. We are not fierce by nature, but we remember in layers, and all our layers were full. Then the humans arrived. Not as conquerors descending in theatrical wrath. They arrived like a solved equation. 3 ships translated in close enough to make nonsense of our tactical expectations. Their signatures had been masked behind debris drift until the last instant. Precision strikes sheared the Varkal command spires from the station's outer crown, without venting the civilian habitats beneath. Boarding pods punched through exactly where our sabotage had collapsed internal shields. Their marines moved fast in the low corridors, sealing bulkheads, tagging friendlies by encrypted patch, bypassing trapped nursery sectors because someone, somewhere, had read our architecture better than we had ourselves. I saw one human soldier in the central archive vault. Armor scarred, visor cracked, rifle low because he had already identified me as non-combatant. Behind him the station alarms wailed in 3 languages and 2 emergency chem songs. "You Aresh?" he asked. I gave the Ithari pulse for assent. He nodded once, then "Come on. We're getting your archive out. My archive, not seizing it, not burning it, out." Outside Keth Vale, the war widened beyond anything my old mind could have held. Human fleets drove inward from the neglected rim, with momentum the elder maps had never respected. Their secret propulsion and distributed industry collapsed the old meaning of distance. Worlds we had thought isolated became connected by human logistics in weeks. Occupation garrisons found themselves cut off as subject species revolted in their rear. The Varkal crown clusters attempted to consolidate near the center, but human interdiction tore apart the tributary systems that had fed them for ages. The Keld tried terror reprisals on rebelling moons. Human response units hit their bone citadels before the broadcasts had finished propagating. And still there was discipline. Humanity did not answer genocide with indiscriminate slaughter. They targeted fleets, foundries, command nodes, sterilization infrastructure, tribute banks, cull laboratories, orbital weapons. They broke the elder species as ruling systems. When planets surrendered, they were occupied under law, their war industries dismantled, their surviving populations contained and monitored rather than exterminated. Trials were prepared even while battles still burned. Evidence mattered to them with the same severity as vengeance. That more than their weapons made admiration possible. Anyone can destroy and rage. To remain bounded after Harrogate, after Elio 9, after the Senru bloom, after generations of seeing what the old powers had done to everyone smaller than themselves, that was not softness. It was a harder thing. The final Varkal collapse came not at the center, but in the corridors they had always used to frighten us. Tributary lanes went dark to them and bright to us. Ithari guides led human task groups through fuel shoals only our swimmers knew. Senru cloud mines slipped through magnetic weather to blind defense nets. Talarin reef engineers turned occupied ocean worlds against their garrisons. Across the former subordinate species, rebellion stopped being a prayer and became logistics. I walked under an open sky on Keth Vale for the first time after liberation, because the human engineers had dismantled the station's permanent storm shroud. Above me, stars burned where once there had only been Varkal traffic glare. My memory lattices, shaped for so long by resignation, felt painfully loose. Later I was asked to testify at the first tribunal convened in the reclaimed middle band. Humans sat beside Ithari, Senru, Talarin, and species I had only known as tribute entries. We presented records of sterilizations, orbit burnings, coercive quotas, induced famines, civic calls. The elder defendants did not suddenly become comprehensible. The Varkal still insisted pruning had been rational. The Keld still framed massacre as structural communication. But for the first time in my life, their reasons did not matter more than our dead. Humanity did not found an empire from the ruins. Many feared they would. I feared it too, because power teaches appetite. Instead, they bound themselves into the new accords they had once demanded from weakness and later enforced from strength. No species could limit another's expansion by inherited privilege. No tribute system, no sterilization law. No monopoly on interstellar transit. Shared oversight of strategic weapons. Protected sovereignty for developing civilizations. Intervention mandates against exterminatory force, no matter the perpetrator. Imperfect, of course, all orders are. But this one began with the assumption that the small are not food. I return often, in memory and in person, to the first human I met on Keth Vale. I saw her once more, long after the war, standing on a tribunal balcony as ships from former subject worlds came and went without asking permission from ancient monsters. She looked older than ever, and tired in a way victory does not cure. "You were not soft," I told her. She gave a short human laugh. "No. Just patient." I considered that with Ithari slowness. I mistook the difference. "So did they," she said, and turned to watch the traffic. I was hatched beneath a confiscated sky. I believed power was a law of nature and terror its grammar. I believed the elder species had won some argument before my people ever learned to speak. I believed new civilizations entered the galaxy only to be measured, limited, and taught obedience. I was wrong. Humans came from the far dark, where the old powers rarely looked. They arrived late, listened carefully, bowed when necessary, lied when prudent, learned everything, endured what they had to endure, and hid the fire of their making until the hour when concealment had purchased enough future to matter. Then they struck not to replace the old cruelty with their own, but to end the idea that cruelty was civilization. There are still graves without number. Harrogate remains ash and poisoned weather. Elio 9 still carries scars visible from orbit. In the Senru drift, lost brood songs drift through memorial fields and make even humans fall quiet. Nothing restores the dead, but history has reopened. Now, when young species emerge on the rimward dark or in the crowded inner dust and send out their first uncertain signals, they do not speak first to masters. They speak into a galaxy that may yet answer as neighbors. And when I stand beneath a sky no one owns, I remember the long human silence after Harrogate, the empty channels, the vanished ships, the breath drawn in grief so deep the whole galaxy mistook it for surrender. It was not surrender. It was the sound of fear ending.